When Kira Sloan buried her husband beneath the twisted oak behind their burned homestead, she buried her last reason to believe in mercy. The widow stood in the September heat, dirt caked under her fingernails, watching buzzards circle overhead. Like dark prayers, she couldn't bring herself to speak. 3 days since the fever took Thomas. 2 days since the creditors came calling. 1 day since she discovered their savings had vanished into her husband's gambling debts. Debts that now rested squarely on her shoulders. The morning sun painted the Colorado territory in shades of amber and rust, beautiful as a lie. Kira adjusted the worn brim of Thomas's hat, the only thing of value she had left besides the calloused strength in her hands. She'd sold everything else, the livestock, the furniture, even her mother's wedding ring. Still wasn't enough. "Ma'am." The voice came from behind her, rough as sandpaper but gentle in its delivery. She turned to find a man approaching on foot, leading a pack mule loaded with mining equipment. Tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter sky. His clothes were practical, well-worn, but clean. "Name's Holden. Baxter," he said, removing his hat. "Heard about your loss. I'm sorry for your trouble." Kira studied him warily. In her experience, men who approached grieving widows usually wanted something. "Thank you kindly, Mr. Baxter. But I'll be fine on my own." A lie, and they both knew it. Holden's gaze swept over the charred remains of the cabin, the fresh grave, the empty corrals. "Forgive my presumption, but you don't look fine. You look like a woman who's run out of options." Heat flared in her chest. "My circumstances are none of your concern." "Maybe not." He settled his hat back on his head. "But I've got a proposition. That might interest you anyway." Despite herself, Kira felt her attention sharpen. "I'm listening." "I've got a claim up in the mountains. Good water, decent shelter built with my own hands, and promising signs of color in the creek. Real color, not fool's gold. Problem is, I need help working it. Someone who's not afraid of honest labor and won't ask too many questions about a man who prefers his own company to the noise and gossip of town. And in return, food, shelter, and a fair share of whatever we pull from the ground." His eyes met hers steadily, unwavering as mountain stone. "No strings, no expectations beyond honest work. Your labor for your keep, and whatever fortune we might find." Kira's laugh held no humor. "Mr. Baxter, I appreciate the offer, but I know nothing about mining. Nothing about panning for gold or reading rock formations or any of the skills that might actually prove useful. Can you cook without burning the beans? Yes. Can you work from sunup to sundown without complaining about blisters or aching muscles? I've been doing that my whole life. Can you keep your own counsel and mind your own business? I reckon so. Then you know enough." Holden adjusted the pack on his mule, checking the rope with practiced hands. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Sloan. I'm not a man who takes to company easily. Had my fill of people and their complications long ago. But I've seen enough desperate folks in this territory to recognize when someone needs a lifeline thrown their way." The word desperate stung because it carried the weight of absolute truth. Kira had maybe $2 to her name and nowhere to go. Winter would be here soon, and she had no illusions about surviving it alone with nothing but pride to warm her bones. "Why?" she asked, studying his weathered face for deception. "Why would you offer charity to a complete stranger? What's in it for you beyond an extra pair of hands?" Something flickered in Holden's expression, a shadow of old pain quickly masked, like clouds passing over winter sun. "Maybe because strangers are safer than people who think they know your story. Maybe because I understand what it's like to have nowhere else to turn." The buzzards overhead cried out, harsh and mocking. Kira looked once more at Thomas's grave, at the ashes of the life she'd tried to build. Sometimes survival meant swallowing pride along with everything else. "I'll need an hour to gather my things." "Take your time." Holden moved to check his mule's pack straps. "The mountains aren't going anywhere." An hour later, Kira followed Holden. Baxter up a winding mountain trail that seemed to lead toward the very edge of the world. She carried everything she owned in a single canvas bag: 2 dresses, a spare pair of boots, her father's Bible with its worn leather binding, and a small wooden box containing letters from her sister back east, correspondence from a life that now felt like someone else's dream. The path climbed steadily through stands of golden aspen and towering pine, the air growing thinner and cleaner with each mile they gained. Holden moved ahead of her with the easy, ground-eating stride of a man accustomed to solitude, pausing occasionally to let her catch her breath without making it seem like charity or weakness. "How long have you been up here?" she asked during one such rest, grateful for the excuse to study the man who'd become her unlikely savior. 2 years, give or take. He gazed up at the peaks surrounding them, their faces carved by wind and time into expressions of eternal patience. Long enough to appreciate the quiet. Long enough to forget why I ever thought I needed anything else. Don't you get lonely? Loneliness is just another kind of weather. You learn to dress for it. They crested a ridge as the sun reached its zenith, and Kira got her first look at what would be her new home. A small but well-built cabin sat in a natural clearing beside a creek that sparkled like scattered silver coins. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks touched with early snow that caught the afternoon light like scattered prayers offered up to an indifferent sky. "It's beautiful," she said, surprised by the truth of it, by how something so simple could stir hope in her chest. "Beautiful doesn't put food on the table or keep the wolves at bay," Holden replied, but she caught the hint of satisfaction in his voice, the pride of a man who'd built something with his own hands. "But it'll do." The cabin was modest but sturdy, built from local timber and chinked tight against the mountain weather. Inside, Kira found a single room with a stone fireplace that dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table scarred by years of use, and two narrow bunks built into opposite walls, a arrangement that spoke of careful thought about privacy and propriety. "You'll take the inside bunk," Holden said, setting down her bag with the same gentle care he might show a wounded bird. "I prefer to sleep closer to the door anyway." Old habits from less peaceful times. That first evening, they worked together, preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork, moving around the small space with surprising ease. Holden moved with practiced efficiency, a man who'd learned to make do with little and waste nothing. Kira tried to find her place in the rhythm of this new life, this partnership born of necessity and sealed with nothing more than a handshake and desperate hope. The silence between them felt less awkward than she'd expected, more like the quiet understanding between old partners than the brittle tension of strangers forced together by circumstance. When they did speak, it was about practical matters: where to find the well, how to bank the fire for the night, which shelf held the coffee tin. After supper, Holden spread a hand-drawn map on the table, showing her the various claims and diggings, scattered along the creek like beads on a string. "Most of the easy pickings are gone," he explained, tracing the waterway with one calloused finger. "Picked clean by men who didn't have the patience for real mining. But there are signs further upstream, if you know how to read them. Deep cuts in the rock that suggest something bigger than surface color." "How much bigger?" Holden's smile was enigmatic, touched with the kind of hope that could either save a man or destroy him. "Big enough to change everything, if we're lucky. Big enough to get us both killed, if we're not careful about who we trust." "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the valley, multiple riders approaching fast through the darkness. But as Holden reached for the rifle above the door, Kira realized her refuge might have just become her greatest danger. The riders materialized from the darkness like specters, their horses' breath steaming in the cold mountain air. 3 men, maybe 4. Kira couldn't tell in the flickering light that spilled from the cabin's single window. What she could see was the glint of metal at their hips and the way they sat their saddles. Confident, predatory, like wolves who'd caught a familiar scent. Holden's hand found the rifle's stock with practiced ease. "Stay behind me," he murmured, his voice carrying none of the gentle warmth she'd grown accustomed to over their brief acquaintance. This was a different man entirely, harder, more dangerous. "Whatever happens, don't speak unless I tell you." 2. The lead rider called out from the darkness. "Baxter, we know you're in there. Time we had ourselves a conversation." Kira recognized the voice before she saw the face. Gideon Rowe, one of Thomas's gambling companions. Her blood turned to ice water. If Gideon was here, it meant her husband's debts had followed her even into these remote mountains. "Evening, Gideon," Holden called back, stepping onto the cabin's narrow porch with the rifle cradled in his arms. "Little late for social calls, don't you think?" Gideon urged his horse forward, close enough that the firelight caught his weathered features and the cruel smile playing at his lips. Heard you took an astray. Thought we'd come up and make sure. She knows she's got obligations to settle. Mrs. Sloane's obligations are her own business. Are they now? Another rider moved into the light. Malachi Shaw, a man whose reputation for violence preceded him like a shadow. See, we got paper says different. Legal paper, signed and witnessed. Kira's heart hammered against her ribs. The promissory notes. She'd hoped Thomas had been bluffing when he'd mentioned signing them, but apparently his desperation had run deeper than even she'd known. Papers can be disputed, Holden said mildly, but Kira could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his thumb rested near the rifle's hammer, especially when the signatory ain't around to verify his mark. Gideon's laugh was ugly as a buzzard's cry. Widow's responsible for her husband's debts. That's the law, Baxter. You know it same as I do. Law's one thing. Justice is another. Justice? Malachi spat into the dirt. Justice is paying what you owe. Woman owes us near $2,000, plus interest. Been accumulating right nicely since Tommy went and got himself dead. $2,000. The number hit Kira like a physical blow. She'd known Thomas had gambling problems, but this was a fortune. More money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes of honest work. I don't have that kind of money, she said, stepping forward despite Holden's warning gesture. I don't have any money. Well now, Gideon's smile widened, showing teeth gone yellow with tobacco. That's what we figured. Lucky for you, we're reasonable men, willing to work out alternative arrangements. The way he said it made Kira's skin crawl. She'd heard stories about women who couldn't pay their debts, about the kinds of arrangements men like Gideon preferred. Her hand moved instinctively to the knife at her belt, Thomas's skinning knife, the only weapon she owned. Only arrangement needed is for you boys to ride on out of here, Holden said, his voice carrying a warning clear as church bells. Mrs. Sloane is under my protection now. Your protection? The third rider spoke up, a younger man Kira didn't recognize, his face eager with the kind of violence that came from inexperience. What makes you think you can protect anybody, hermit? 3 against 1 ain't favorable odds. Depends on the 3, Holden replied. And depends on the 1. Something in his tone made even Malachi shift uncomfortably in his saddle. Kira realized she knew almost nothing about the man who'd offered her sanctuary. What had he done before? Becoming a prospector? What skills had he learned in those less peaceful times he'd mentioned? We ain't here for trouble, Baxter, Gideon said, though his hand rested on his gun butt. Just here for what's ours. Woman can come with us peaceful-like. Work off her debt in town. There's plenty of establishments that'd appreciate her. Domestic skills. Heat flared in Kira's chest. I'd rather die than work in one of your brothels. That can be arranged too, Malachi said quietly. The rifle in Holden's hands shifted almost imperceptibly, but the movement was enough to freeze every man in the clearing. Gentlemen, he said, his voice soft as silk and twice as dangerous. I believe this conversation has run its course. Has it now? Gideon's eyes glittered in the firelight. See, thing is, Baxter, we know about your little operation up here. Know about the color you've been finding. Strikes us that a man with a rich claim might be willing to help a neighbor in distress. Kira felt the blood drain from her face. They weren't just here for Thomas's debts. They were here for whatever Holden had found in his mind. The debts were just an excuse, a way to get their hands on his claim through her. My claim's registered proper with the territorial office, Holden said. Documented and legal. Sure it is. But accidents happen in these mountains. Cave-ins, floods, claim jumpers. Dangerous country for a man working alone. Gideon's smile turned predatory. Of course, a man with partners might find himself better protected. Partners who could help him work his claim more efficiently. And all I'd have to do is sign over half my operation. 3/4. We're providing security. After all, Holden was quiet for a long moment, and Kira found herself holding her breath. $2,000 was an impossible sum, but a working gold claim, that might actually be worth something. Would he sacrifice everything he'd built to protect a woman he barely knew? I'll need time to consider your generous offer, Holden said finally. Time's a luxury, Baxter. We'll give you till morning to decide. Either you partner up with us, or the widow comes down to settle her debts the traditional way. One way or another, we're leaving with what we're owed. The riders wheeled their horses around and melted back into the darkness, leaving only the echo of hoofbeats and the acrid smell of their tobacco. Kira stood frozen on the porch, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the disaster she'd brought to this peaceful place. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know Thomas had borrowed that much. I never would have come here if I'd known I'd bring this trouble to your door." Holden lowered the rifle and turned to study her face in the flickering light. "You got nothing to apologize for. Your husband's debts ain't your debts, no matter what those vultures claim. But the law's got nothing to do with justice, and those men got nothing to do with the law." His jaw was set like granite. "Question is, what are we going to do about it?" The way he said, we made something flutter in Kira's chest. Hope, maybe, or just gratitude that she wasn't facing this alone. But as she looked into Holden's winter blue eyes, she realized the real question wasn't what they would do about Gideon and his men. It was what secret Holden was hiding that made him willing to risk everything for a stranger. Dawn broke over the mountains like a reluctant promise, painting the peaks in shades of rose and gold that should have been beautiful but felt ominous instead. Kira had barely slept, her mind churning with impossible calculations and darker possibilities. Every sound in the night had made her reach for the knife beside her bed. The whisper of wind through pine needles, the crack of settling timber, the distant cry of a hunting owl. Holden was already up when she emerged from her bunk, coffee brewing over the banked coals of the fire. He moved with the same quiet efficiency as always, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept drifting to the window. "They'll be back," she said, accepting the tin cup he offered. "Most likely." He settled into the chair, across from her, cradling his own coffee like a prayer. "Question is whether we'll be here when they arrive." Kira's heart skipped. "You want to run?" "I want to survive." His gaze met hers steadily. Sometimes those amount to the same thing. She studied his face, searching for answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. "What aren't you telling me, Holden? Those men knew about your claim, knew more than they should about a hermit prospector working alone in the mountains." Something flickered in his expression, a moment of calculation quickly masked. Gideon Rose got ears all over this territory. Man in his line of work needs to know who's finding color and who's not. His line of work being gambling and extortion, among other things. Holden set down his cup and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. Gideon's what you might call an entrepreneur. He's got interests in half the claims between here and Denver, one way or another. Legal interests. Legal's a flexible concept out here. Kira joined him at the window, close enough to catch the scent of soap and wood smoke that seemed to cling to his clothes. The clearing looked peaceful in the morning light, but she could feel the weight of watching eyes from the surrounding forest. "There's something else," she said quietly. "The way you handled that rifle last night. The way they backed down when you spoke. You're not just a prospector, are you?" Holden was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old regrets. Man can be many things in his lifetime. Not all of them bear repeating, but some of them might be useful right about now. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Maybe so. He moved away from the window and began gathering supplies: jerky, hardtack, ammunition for the rifle. The systematic way he packed suggested this wasn't the first time he'd had to leave a place in a hurry. "Where will we go?" Kira asked. "There's a place I know. Hidden Canyon about 10 miles north. Used to be a Ute camp before the treaties moved them out. Good water, defensible position, and far enough off the beaten path that it might take Gideon a while to find us. And then what? We can't hide forever." Holden's hands stilled on the pack he was filling. "No, we can't. But maybe we don't have to." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time to stop running from the past and start using it." He straightened, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of someone else entirely, someone harder, more dangerous than the gentle prospector who'd offered her shelter. "Tell me, Kira, what do you know about mining law?" "Nothing at all." "Well, here's the first lesson. A man can't be forced to give up a legal claim without proper legal process. And proper legal process takes time. Time we might be able to use to our advantage." "I don't understand." "Gideon's counting on us being isolated up here, cut off from any kind of official help. But there's a territorial marshal's office in Silverton, maybe 3 days hard ride south. If we could get word to them about what's happening here, they'd come investigate. Maybe." If we gave them reason to believe their interests were at stake. Kira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What kind of interests? Holden moved to a loose board near the fireplace and pried it up, revealing a hidden cache. What he pulled out made her breath catch. A leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold, and beneath it, a badge tarnished with age but still recognizable. Deputy U.S. Marshal, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. Was, Holden corrected, tucking the badge back into its hiding place. Long time ago, before I decided the law and justice weren't necessarily the same thing. The pieces began falling into place. His easy familiarity with weapons, the way he'd handled Gideon's threats, the careful way he'd positioned his cabin to watch the approaches. You're not really a prospector at all. I'm whatever I need to be to survive. He hefted the gold pouch, feeling its weight. But I've been finding color in that creek. More than I let on, and in places that suggest there's a mother lode somewhere upstream. How much more? Enough to make Gideon's 2,000 look like pocket change. Enough to make men kill for it. His eyes met hers, hard as winter sky. Enough to make them very interested in keeping anyone from talking to territorial authorities about their methods. The sound of approaching horses cut through the morning air, multiple riders, moving fast, and making no attempt at stealth. Holden cursed under his breath and shouldered his pack. Back door, he said urgently. Move. But as they reached the rear of the cabin, Kira caught sight of movement in the trees behind them. More riders, positioned to cut off any retreat. Gideon had learned from the previous night's encounter and come prepared for resistance. We're surrounded, she whispered that Holden's jaw tightened. Not yet, we're not. He led her to what looked like a solid section of the cabin's back wall. But when he pressed against a particular board, it swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow passage that led into the hillside behind the structure. Where does it go? Mine shaft connects to the main workings about 50 yards upstream. He handed her the gold pouch, its weight surprising in her hands. Take this and keep moving no matter what you hear. Follow the shaft until you reach daylight. Then head north toward the big lightning-struck pine. Wait for me there. What about you? I'm going to give them something to think about. The sound of boots on the front porch made her decision for her. She slipped into the dark passage, clutching the gold and fighting down panic as the narrow walls seemed to press in around her. Behind her, she heard Holden's voice greeting their visitors with deceptive calm. Morning, Gideon. You're up early. Time for talking's over, Baxter. You made your choice when you decided to help that woman run. Run? We haven't gone anywhere. Don't take us for fools. We know about your bolt hole, your emergency supplies. Question is, where is she? The passage seemed to stretch forever, carved through solid rock by hands that had worked in darkness and hope. Kira's fingers traced the rough walls, following the slight current of air that promised eventual freedom. But with each step, one thought echoed in her mind. What else was Holden hiding? And why did she suddenly feel like the gold in her hands was nothing compared to the secrets buried in these mountains? The mine shaft opened into daylight like a mouth gasping for breath, and Kira stumbled out into a hidden ravine she never would have found on her own. The lightning-struck pine Holden had mentioned stood sentinel 50 yards away, its blackened trunk split down the middle but still alive, still reaching toward the sky with stubborn determination. She pressed herself against its scarred bark and waited, the leather pouch of gold heavy in her hands and heavier still on her conscience. Behind her, echoing through the mountain, came the distant crack of gunfire. 3 shots, then silence that stretched like a held breath. Please let him be alive. The prayer formed without conscious thought, surprising her with its intensity. When had Holden Baxter become more than just a stranger offering shelter? When had his survival become tied so closely to her own hopes for the future? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. The moment she'd seen him willing to risk everything for a woman he barely knew. Minutes crawled by like wounded animals. The gold pouch grew slick in her sweating palms, and she found herself staring at its contents with growing amazement. Nuggets the size of her thumb nestled against smaller flakes that caught the morning sun like captured starlight. This wasn't the meager findings of a struggling prospector. This was a fortune, enough to make men kill for it, Holden had said. Looking at the gold now, she believed him. The sound of breaking branches made her spin around, hand moving instinctively to her knife. But it was Holden who emerged from the undergrowth, moving with the careful gait of a man nursing fresh injuries. Blood stained his shirt sleeve, and a purple bruise was already darkening along his left cheekbone. "Thank God," she breathed, rushing to meet him. "I heard shots, warning shots mostly." His smile was grim. Gideon's not quite ready to commit murder in broad daylight. Yet, she helped him settle against a fallen log, noting the way he favored his left side. "You're hurt. Just scraped up some." Malachi got a little enthusiastic with his fists when they couldn't find you. He nodded toward the pouch in her hands. "Still got our insurance policy, I see." "Holden, this is incredible. There's enough gold here to buy our way out of this mess, if we're smart about it." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the edges torn and stained with what might have been blood. "Found this in Gideon's saddlebags while they were tearing apart the cabin." Kira unfolded the document and felt her heart sink. It was a deed transfer, already partially filled out, requiring only her signature to hand over mineral rights to a section of land that included Holden's claim. "They came prepared," she said. "More than prepared. This is legal paperwork, filed through proper channels. Someone's been planning this for a while." Holden's eyes were hard as flint. "Question is, who's backing Gideon? He's not smart enough to set up something this elaborate on his own." The crack of a branch behind them sent them both diving for cover. But the voice that called out was unexpected, feminine, educated, and carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Mr. Baxter? Mrs. Sloan? I believe we need to talk." A woman emerged from the tree line, elegant despite the practical riding clothes and the Winchester rifle cradled in her arms. Auburn hair was pinned back beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and her green eyes held the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. She moved with the confident grace of someone who belonged in these mountains despite her obvious refinement. "Anais Covington," she said by way of introduction, lowering the rifle but not setting it aside. "I represent certain interests in Denver that have been watching this situation develop." "What kind of interests?" Holden asked, his own weapon still trained on the unexpected visitor. "The kind that prefers stability and legal process to the sort of frontier justice Gideon Rowe represents." Anais settled onto a boulder as if taking tea in her parlor. "My employers have significant investments in this territory, Mr. Baxter. Investments that suffer when men like Rowe decide to make their own rules." Kira found her voice. "Who are your employers?" "People who understand that a properly worked gold claim is worth more than the sum of its raw materials. People who believe in long-term development rather than smash-and-grab operations." Anais's smile was pleasant and utterly cold. "People who might be willing to help you resolve your current difficulties." "In exchange for what?" Holden's voice carried deep suspicion. "Partnership, legal protection, access to proper mining equipment and expertise." Anais gestured toward the pouch of gold in Kira's hands. "From what our geological surveys suggest, you've barely scratched the surface of what's buried in these mountains." Geological surveys. Kira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "You've been watching us. We've been watching this entire region. The Colorado Territory is entering a new phase of development, Mrs. Sloan. The days of individual prospectors making their fortunes in isolation are coming to an end. The future belongs to organized enterprises with the capital to exploit resources properly." Holden shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. "And if we're not interested in your kind of organization, then you'll likely end up dealing with Gideon's kind instead." Anais's tone remained conversational, but steel glinted beneath the silk. "Or perhaps with the territorial authorities, who might be very interested to learn about certain irregularities in your claim registration. Former lawmen should be more careful about their paperwork, don't you think?" The threat hung in the air, like smoke. Kira looked between Holden and this elegant predator, understanding that they'd stumbled into something far larger than Thomas's gambling debts or even Gideon's crude extortion attempts. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "A simple arrangement. You sign over controlling interest in the claim to my employers. In return, you receive legal protection, a guaranteed percentage of all proceeds, and the elimination of your late husband's outstanding debts." Anais pulled out her own set of papers, far more professional than Gideon's crude forgery. You'd be partners in a legitimate mining operation rather than fugitives hiding in the mountains. And if we refuse, then you're welcome to try your luck with Gideon. Though I should mention that his patience appears to be wearing thin. My sources suggest he's planning a more direct approach for tonight. As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Multiple riders, moving with purpose. Anais smiled and rose gracefully, shouldering her rifle. I'll leave you to consider your options, but I wouldn't take too long if I were you. She paused at the edge of the clearing. Oh, and Mrs. Sloane? That gold you're holding represents perhaps 1% of what's actually buried in this mountain. The question is whether you want to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder for men like Gideon, or whether you're ready to claim your true inheritance. She melted back into the forest as suddenly as she'd appeared, leaving them alone with choices that seemed to narrow with each passing moment. But as the sound of approaching riders grew louder, Kira realized the most dangerous revelation wasn't about gold or claims or corporate interests. It was the growing certainty that neither Holden nor Anais had told her the complete truth about why this particular mountain was worth killing. For the riders came like thunder down the mountain, at least 8 men this time, with Gideon Rowe leading the charge and murder written across his weathered face. Kira and Holden pressed themselves deeper into the rocky outcropping that barely concealed them, the gold pouch clutched against her chest like a talisman that had lost its power to protect. This ends now, Gideon's voice carried across the ravine as his men spread out in a practiced formation. Baxter, I know you're out there. Last chance to do this the civilized way. Holden's jaw tightened. Civilized, he muttered. Man wouldn't know civilized if it bit him on his worthless hide. But Kira barely heard him. Her attention was fixed on something else entirely. A glint of metal from the ridge above Gideon's position, where the morning sun caught the barrel of a rifle that definitely hadn't been there moments before. Then another glint, and another, until she counted at least 6 weapons trained on the riders below. Holden, she whispered. Look up. His eyes followed her gaze, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw genuine surprise cross his features. Well, I'll be damned. The voice that rang out from the ridge belonged to Anais Covington, though the woman who stood up from behind the rocks bore little resemblance to the elegant negotiator from earlier. Gone was the refined demeanor. In its place stood someone who moved like a predator and spoke with the authority of command. Gideon Rowe, she called down. By order of the Territorial Marshal's office, you and your men are under arrest for extortion, claim jumping, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Gideon's horse reared as he wheeled around, his face twisting with rage and confusion. What kind of game is this, lady? You got no authority here. Don't I? Anais held up a badge that caught the sunlight. Deputy Territorial Marshal Anais Covington, Special Investigator for Mining Fraud. And these gentlemen with me represent the federal interest in maintaining law and order in this territory. Kira felt Holden stiffen beside her. Federal interest. He repeated quietly. Son of a, you've been under investigation for months, Rowe, Anais continued. Every forged deed, every coerced signature, every claim you've stolen through intimidation and violence. Did you really think the territorial government would ignore your little empire forever? The pieces suddenly fell into place with crystalline clarity. Kira turned to stare at Holden, understanding flooding through her like cold mountain water. You knew, she said. You knew who she was. Suspected, he admitted, his eyes never leaving the drama unfolding below. The geological surveys, the too convenient timing, the way she knew details about my past that weren't common knowledge. Government's been trying to clean up the mining districts for years. Stands to reason they'd send someone to investigate. And you. Kira's voice carried a note of accusation. Who are you really, Holden Baxter? He was quiet for a long moment, watching as Gideon's men looked around nervously, realizing they were vastly outgunned and facing federal marshals rather than local troublemakers. I told you true, he said finally. I was a deputy marshal long time ago, retired under complicated circumstances. Been trying to disappear ever since, but apparently a man's past has a way of catching up with him. Below them, the standoff was reaching its conclusion. Faced with overwhelming force and the prospect of federal charges, most of Gideon's men were throwing down their weapons. Only Malachi Shaw seemed inclined to fight, his hand hovering near his gun until one of the federal marshals put a rifle bullet in the dirt at his horse's feet. Smart choice, Anais called down approvingly. Now, Mr. Rowe, I believe you have some documents in your possession that don't belong to you. Forged deeds, coerced signatures, that sort of thing. I don't know what you're talking about, Gideon snarled, but his defiance lacked conviction. Then perhaps a thorough search will refresh your memory. As the marshals moved to secure their prisoners, Anais looked directly toward the outcropping where Kira and Holden hid. She raised her voice just enough to carry. Mrs. Sloane, Mr. Baxter, you can come out now. This matter is concluded. They emerged cautiously, Kira still clutching the gold pouch, and Holden moving with the careful gait of a man who'd taken too many hard knocks. Anais met them halfway, her official demeanor softening slightly. I apologize for the deception, she said. But we needed to let Rowe's operation play out enough to gather evidence. Your situation provided the perfect opportunity. You used us as bait, Kira said, anger flaring in her chest. I used an existing situation to serve justice, Anais corrected gently. And in the process, I believe I've solved several problems. Your husband's debts were based on fraudulent contracts. They're null and void. Rowe's claim on your obligations dies with his arrest. And the gold claim remains entirely yours, properly registered and legally protected. Anais smiled. Though if you're interested in that partnership I mentioned, my employers are still very much interested in development opportunities. Holden snorted. Government. Employers, I'm guessing. Private interests with government backing. The territorial authority wants legitimate development, not chaos and violence. Your claim could anchor a proper mining district, bring law and civilization to this region. Kira looked at the pouch in her hands, then at the mountains surrounding them, then finally at Holden. What do you think? I think, he said slowly, that maybe it's time to stop running from the past and start building something for the future. 3 months later, Kira stood outside the USA office in what was already being called Baxter's Crossing, watching the first wagons roll down from the expanded mining operation. The settlement was small but growing, with a proper school, a church, and even a newspaper that reported on the surprisingly rich strikes in the surrounding mountains. Holden emerged from the mine office, his face bearing the satisfaction of a man who'd found purpose again. The badge on his vest read, Town Marshal. Apparently, some kinds of retirement didn't take. How's our investment looking? She asked, slipping her arm through his. Better than we dared hope. Anais was right about, barely scratching the surface. He covered her hand with his own, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. More than enough to build that life we've been talking about. Speaking of building, Kira smiled. I had an interesting conversation with Doc Patterson this morning. About what? About the likelihood that there'll be 3 of US planning for the future instead of just 2. Holden stopped walking entirely, his eyes wide with amazement and something deeper, joy, pure and uncomplicated. Are you certain? As certain as mountain sunrise. He swept her into his arms right there in the middle of the muddy street, spinning her around while she laughed, and the townsfolk cheered their approval. When he finally set her down, his eyes were bright with tears he wasn't ashamed to shed. I love you, Kira Baxter, he said, using the name she'd taken when they married a month after Gideon's arrest. And I love you, you stubborn prospector. They walked home together through the growing town, past the schoolhouse where children played and the church where wedding bells rang out over mountain valleys that bloomed with new life and older love. Well, now, folks, that's the tale of how a widow with nothing left found everything she never knew she needed. Sometimes the richest claims aren't the ones that glitter in your pan. They're the ones that grow in your heart. If this story struck gold in your hearts, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. And don't forget to comment below and let us know where you're watching from today. We love hearing from folks all across this great land.